Hello. In the last video, I'll put a link up above, we talked about decibels as a concept of loudness, but the entire conversation was based on instantaneous moments in time. How loud is this thing right now? Well, when we're listening to a song, we're generally much more interested in how loud the thing is over a period of time. Particularly if you want to upload your song to Spotify, they will tell you how loud your entire song is allowed to be. Now, it doesn't matter if it's 30 seconds long or 10 minutes long. The average loudness of that thing over the entire period of time cannot exceed a certain threshold. So we need to be able to calculate our loudness according to those rules. So where were we at the end of the last discussion? Well, we talked about momentary volumes, and now that we're in the digital world, let's just deal exclusively with the dBFS scale, the decibels full scale measurement system. But instead of taking those momentary snapshots, now we want to start looking over a longer period of time. Now, traditionally, the way we would average out loudness over a period of time was using a method called RMS, or root mean square. And even though it sounds very complicated and it involves a very unpleasant looking algorithm, it's actually incredibly simple. The concept behind RMS is that sound waves oscillate about a zero axis, so you have positive values of sound and negative values of sound. If you were playing a sine wave and you averaged that sine wave out simply by adding all of the numbers together and averaging them, you would end up with zero, because every single positive value of the sine wave would have an equivalent negative value. And so we need some way to get rid of those negative numbers. And the easiest way to do it is to square every single number in the range. Every time when you take a snapshot of an amplitude, if you double that value, if you have -4 and you say -4 times -4, it's going to be positive 16. So by doubling a number, you throw the negative value of it away. So if you square every single number and then you average them, you're going to get the genuinely average value of that range, but the result is going to be double what you really want it to be. And so right at the end of the process, you perform a square root to take it away. So if you do 3 squared is 9, the square root of 9 is 3, and you're back to where you started. So RMS was very highly considered for a very long period of time as an excellent means of taking the average loudness of a piece of music over a set period of time. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't account for our human ears. It's taking that average and it's performing a good mathematical analysis of it, but that sound is hitting our ears. And when we want to start considering how loud something is, we need to understand that the human ear doesn't hear all frequencies the same. In fact, it hears them very unequally indeed. The human ear is very bad at hearing bass sounds, for instance. And this scale that I've brought up here, the K-weighting scale, gives you a graph empirically derived over the span of years by thousands of experiments. This is like a global community effort to try to figure out how different people interpret different frequencies as loudness. And what it tells you is that we're absolutely rubbish at hearing bass. What this K-weighting scale does is it says if you're listening to a piece of music and the bass is massive, you're hearing lots and lots of bass, then it's much worse in reality. If you're hearing it as loud, then it is absolutely dominating the signal. And so the K-weighting scale, by applying this graph to the metering, takes away the bass element of the song, because its very large signal might not be representative of what you're hearing in your ears. If you apply that graph to the monitor, don't forget this is a graph that's applied to the monitoring process. We're talking about metering here. I'm not talking about applying this EQ to your actual sound. But if you apply that graph to the metering, it means that each individual frequency in the entire spectrum each one of those frequencies is not equal, but if you apply the K weighting scale to them, they become represented as equal. So now when the maths of the system, when the algorithm inside your DAW is analysing that sound, each sound is equally represented as a function of what it actually sounds like in your ears. This concept turned into a scale called the Loudness Units Full Scale Measurement, LUFS, or the Loudness K-weighted Full Scale. They're actually the same thing, don't worry about the definitions. They didn't used to be, but they are now. And we can monitor this stuff. So this is Isotopes Insight Monitor. So I'll set the song back to the beginning, set it going. The song is now playing in the background. It is there. I've just turned the master output down. So we've got this meter spamming away down here, and we've got these over here. Let's deal with this one first. This is a dB peak level meter, which means it's telling us the actual loudness of the signal at any given moment in time. It's also telling us what the loudest moment has been. So these little green lines that kind of stick once they get pushed beyond a certain point, it's saying, you know, that the loudest signal, whenever I click that to reset it, it kind of recalibrates itself. It says, right, currently the loudest thing that's happened has been minus 10.8 dB. If I come across anything louder, like the 9.4 that just happened, I'll let you know. And it's constantly updating itself. But the meters themselves are spinning away in the background in real time, kind of giving us a representation of the loudness of the signal. These things over here aren't. These are loudness meters. So let's deal with each one of them in turn. The most important one is in the middle. We'll start with this one. The Loudness Units Integrated Scale is counting the loudness of the entire song, and it's using that K-weighted graph that's being applied over the top of the signal to partially discount some of the bass effects in just the same way that our ears do. And so the bass is not being allowed to over-represent the volume of the entire piece. So that's the absolute loudness of the entire piece. If I take the signal away, that value won't change. It doesn't matter how long I leave the song running in the background, and the song is still running in the background, that signal's not going to change at all, because the Loudness Units Full Scale algorithm has a gate in it. It says if the volume drops below, the loudness drops below a certain level, then we're just going to start, we'll just enter wait mode. We'll twiddle our thumbs and wait for it to come back. And there's a thing called a relative gate, which is a little bit complicated. We don't need to go into it, but basically it's not just a hard and fast gate. There's 70 decibels gate at which if signal drops below that, it just shuts down. There's also this thing called a relative gate, which tries to capture bits hovering around quietness. Let's not go there. That signal hasn't changed whatsoever. If I bring the signal back, it now starts recounting again. And if I give it enough, there we go, it started like changing now. The higher I raise this level, then it's saying, oh, the song is getting louder and louder over an average time. The actual volume loudness that I'm throwing out here is redlining, is peaking, but obviously the average volume of the entire song isn't. I'll just restart the song again, just reset all my meters and kick it off again. So we've seen the integrated scale give us the average loudness of the entire song. What are the other two? Well, this is a momentary scale, and it's acting a little bit like the RMS from the old world style, but it's applying the K-weighting graph, and it's also taking a snapshot of the maximum momentary loudness. So over a 400 millisecond average, the loudest thing that's happened in this song was at minus 14.2 dB. The graph itself is updating every 400 milliseconds, and that's why you can see this one being much more active than this one over here. Short term operates over 3 seconds, so now we're getting a much more elongated average time, but it is still moving forwards. So if we ended up with silence in the song, short term drops off the cliff and falls down to minus infinite because there is no signal, but the momentary sticks at minus 14.2 because that's a max value. So the various different concepts behind metering on display here, and they all combine to give you a really rich feature set of the overall impression of the song. We now know what the loudest thing was, absolutely, from down here. So that's the instantaneous moment at minus 5, probably from the last time the song played. The momentary average over 400 milliseconds was this value. The rolling 3-second average is over here, and the entire song integrated loudness is over here. And all of those different values have different significance and different meanings in whatever context you want. But if you're uploading your thing to Spotify or YouTube, this is the one that you're going to want. Spotify currently has a minus 14 LUFS setting, so if you submit a song louder than that, then they will just arbitrarily chop signal off right the way across the range. They'll just say this thing is getting quieter before it gets through our gate. And so one of the mastering tools in the Isotopes suite, Ozone, allows you to specify a target of minus 14 and say, right, master my song to this, so you get to hear what it's going to sound like when it's averaged out the entire length of the song at minus 14 LUFS. This thing, Insight, is purely a monitor. It's not actually doing anything to the tone at all. It's just telling us how loud the song actually is. One other really fascinating concept to do with loudness, and it's right in front of you, is this thing down here. This is the loudness range. And what this is telling you is how dynamic your sound is. What's the variance between the quiet bits and the loud bits? So now we're not getting just a pure single average value. It's doing analysis of the song and identifying the quiet bits and the loud bits and saying this is how dynamic your song is. Now actually this song is currently scoring poorly. 2.4 is a little bit on the flat side, and I actually think in retrospect, having finished this song and mixed it, I've actually mixed it too hot. The signal is too constantly hot, and I haven't introduced enough dynamic range into my song, and it's something that you need to be aware of. Go back and listen to songs that you love, import them into Cubase if you can get hold of a copy of it, and actually analyse what the signal is. You'll generally tend to find that a lot of particularly the analog stuff recorded 70s, 80s. I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, so I sent some Pink Floyd tracks, and they come through at 7, 8, 9 LUs on this scale. And typically a lot of the music that I really like listening to, it's interesting to my ears because it has dynamic range, is in values much higher than this pretty shoddy 2.3 that we're seeing on the scale. And so that's a thing that I've learned since I finished the mixing of this song and will apply to my future projects. But loudness range and the concept of dynamic range itself is a really important consideration when you're considering loudness over time. We're no longer dealing in instantaneous moments, saying what's the effect of this piece of music over a period of time? How dynamic do I want it to be? If you're producing an EDM track and you want it absolutely pumping, then fine, go for your low range. Isotopes say 1 to 3 is pretty low and above 6 is very dynamic, but there's really no hard and fast rule. You can see this song's kind of dragging itself back up out of the mire a little bit. One final thing I'll mention, because we're looking at this graph here, true peak. This is a quite a mathsy concept, but what we're talking about here is if you're, this absolute hard limit of 0 dB that you must never go over. Well, if you push it too far and you have a signal that's at minus 0.1 for any period of time, then in between those sample snapshots that the computer takes, it's entirely possible that if you draw an average line between them, it's called interpolation, where the computer tries to generate the smoothest curve it possibly can when it's reconstructing waves from digital binary data. And this process of interpolation might very well take the curve past 0. So true peak accounts for those interpolation effects, the intersample peaks they're called. And so you want your true peak to be below 0, not your nominal peak. And so you'll see, generally speaking, when you're looking at meters in the mastering environment, certainly you'll see this concept of true peak, and that's the most important of the values. So that's loudness over time. A really interesting layer on top of the concept of decibels themselves, which in their own right are fascinating. But when you start thinking about volume over a period of time and the effect that that period of time has on our ears, we are human beings with organic ears that respond to different frequencies in different ways and different dynamic ranges in different ways. All of this stuff has to be taken care of, and it's really hard to pin it down scientifically. But the Lufts measurement is the best way that humanity has come up with so far to actually do the job, and it does a pretty fantastic job of it. So I hope that was interesting to you, and if it was, please consider subscribing. If you hit notifications, then you'll find out when my other content comes out, and I hope to see you then. Thanks very much for watching.